You won't be punished for your transformation, my friends, but they will be shocked by it. They're realizing you're not the same person anymore, and it's messing with their head. Not because you've done something loud, but because you've done something they never expected. You changed quietly. You didn't slam doors. You didn't post a dramatic goodbye. You just disappeared from their grip and elevated beyond their reach. You didn't announce a new version of yourself. You just became it. So, before we dive into this, press that like button and subscribe if you're tired of being who they remember and ready to become who you were always meant to be. Stay with me, because this one's gonna hit deep. Hey folks, imagine this. Imagine they've been playing chess with you for years. Same pieces, same board, same predictable moves. And suddenly, you're not there. You're not sitting across from them. The board's untouched. And they're staring at it confused, because they thought you'd always play the game. But what they don't realize is, you burned the board. You didn't flip it in rage. You just realized you had better things to build than to keep playing roles that drained you. That's what it looks like when you evolve in silence. People don't notice your growth at first. They notice your absence. They notice when the energy they used to manipulate suddenly stops responding. They notice when the conversations dry up, when the emotional access they used to depend on turns into distance, peace, stillness. And that's when it starts to eat at them, not because they miss you, but because they miss who you used to be around them, predictable, software reactive. But that version of you, he's retired. You see, my friends, some people loved you most when you loved yourself the least, when your boundaries were soft and your need for approval was loud, when your heart was for sale at the price of attention, when your silence was desperation, not discipline. But now, it's different. Now your silence has weight. It carries intention. It's not avoidance, it's elevation. You're not hiding, you're healing. You're not cold, you're controlled. Let me break a lie real quick. They don't actually miss you. They miss controlling how you felt. They miss triggering your reactions. They miss the safety of knowing they could come back and you'd still be there, emotionally waiting. They didn't expect that you'd use the pain to build something instead of break. And now every version of you they used to manipulate no longer picks up the call. That's the power of quiet evolution. It confuses those who thought your worth depended on their validation. It shakes the ones who thought your story paused when they walked out. But you didn't pause. You wrote a new chapter, one that doesn't require their presence, one that doesn't beg for closure. You stopped being a character in their play and became the author of your own. And let's be real, this transformation didn't come easy. You had nights where your chest was heavy and your thoughts were loud. You had moments where your fingers hovered over your phone, craving connection. You had memories that tried to pull you back. But instead of giving in, you chose growth. You chose to sit with the discomfort, to study it, to rise from it. And that, my friends, is what they'll never understand. That you didn't evolve to prove anything. You evolved because staying the same was killing you. So here's what I want you to write in the comments right now. I don't play who I used to be. Show them, show yourself. Show the world around you that this evolution isn't a trend, it's your truth. Press that like button, subscribe, and turn on the bell because we're just getting started. Stay with me. This is where everything begins to shift. Number 1, you were predictable. Now you're a paradox. They weren't afraid to lose you because they thought you'd always be the same. That's the lie they told themselves, and maybe the one you believed too. Back when your love came with no edges. Back when your reactions were guaranteed, your emotions were loud, and your presence was a constant. You were their emotional mirror, always reflecting, always responding, always available. But now, something's changed. And they can feel it. Not just in what you say, but in what you no longer say. You're no longer the person they had a script for. The rhythm they memorized no longer plays. You've become a paradox. Silent but powerful, calm but untouchable, present but unreachable. Imagine this. There was once a light switch, and they could flip it any time they wanted. They'd get a reaction, an answer, a spark. They knew where your buttons were, which words to say, which silences to keep. They had the remote to your nervous system, but now they press the button, and nothing happens. No response, no breakdown, just peace. And peace, to those who thrived on your chaos, feels like punishment. It confuses them, because folks, they weren't ready for the version of you that stopped running on their validation. Now they sit there wondering, why aren't they reaching out? Why aren't they folding like before? Why do they seem so calm? The truth? You've disconnected from the cycle, that loop they thought you'd never leave. That space where your emotions were predictable, your love was on tap, and your energy had no guardrails. You were the open book they kept dog-earing. But now you've rewritten the story, and the page they keep flipping back to, it doesn't exist anymore. The real twist? They thought your kindness was eternal, that your softness was infinite, that no matter what they did, you'd stay familiar. They assumed you were stuck in the chapter where they left you, emotionally dependent, aching, waiting. But you weren't stuck. You were just silent, not weak, focused, not lost, building. They thought the pause in your behavior meant you'd come back unchanged. But what they didn't realize was that silence is where transformation grows. People don't fear losing you. They fear realizing they never really knew you. They fear the moment when you go from being someone who needed them to someone they no longer understand. That's what's happening now. They can't categorize you anymore, can't predict your reactions, can't control your emotions. You're no longer playing the game. You've walked off the board, and they're left holding pieces to a game that no longer exists. And let's be honest, my friends, this wasn't easy. Being predictable came from a place of pain. You thought if you showed up consistently enough, if you gave enough, explained enough, proved enough, maybe they'd finally value you. Maybe they'd stop taking you for granted. But all it did was teach them how to treat you like you'd never leave. Predictability became your prison, a comfort zone wrapped in chains. And the moment you stopped showing up the way they expected, you broke free. Here's the lie you've outgrown, that your loyalty had to be unconditional, even when their respect wasn't. That your reactions made you real. That your softness was proof of love. No, your softness was exploited. Your predictability was rehearsed. And now that you've evolved, they're scrambling to adjust to a reality where their power doesn't work anymore, where their silence doesn't shake you, where your old patterns are dead and buried. They're realizing now that you're not the same. You don't respond. You don't defend. You don't try to fix what they broke with indifference. You've become the one thing they never prepared for, unavailable, emotionally, energetically, spiritually, not out of bitterness, but out of wisdom. And wisdom, folks, has no desire to revisit wounds just because someone finally feels your absence. The old version of you used to need reassurance, used to crumble under silence, used to wait by the phone, overthinking every pause, every emoji, every unsent message. But now you let things be what they are. You let people feel the weight of your absence without sending reminders of your presence. You let the silence speak, because silence is the loudest boundary you can ever set. So if you're sitting here wondering whether it's okay to stop being who they were comfortable with, the answer is yes. You owe no one your old self just because they were more comfortable when you were broken. You're not responsible for making them feel safe in the version of you that no longer exists. You outgrew it. You outgrew the predictability, the emotional codependency, the illusion of needing to be constant just to be worthy. And now you're unpredictable in the best way, peaceful, purpose-driven, measured, intentional. This isn't a rebellion, it's a resurrection. The death of the version of you who was stuck in their expectations, and the rise of a version they'll never get close to again. You're not doing this to hurt anyone. You're doing it because your soul couldn't breathe in that pattern any longer. You've chosen the harder path, the one where growth is lonely but real, the one where silence is sacred, not scary, the one where you don't return to familiar pain just to feel something. So, write this in the comments right now. I don't play predictable anymore. Show them, show yourself, show the world around you that this evolution is not a reaction, it's your revolution. Stay with me, because what's coming next goes even deeper. This is just the beginning. Number 2, you used to break down. Now you break patterns. The version of you that cried for them no longer exists, and the version that replaced it doesn't beg, doesn't chase, doesn't fold. There was a time, my friends, when pain controlled you like a puppet master. One word from them, one rejection, one delayed reply, and you'd spiral. Overthinking, wondering what you did wrong, trying to fix yourself to fit into a version of you they'd accept. That was your reality. And it broke you, again and again, until one day it didn't. Not because the pain stopped, but because you stopped surrendering to it. You see, you didn't become stronger overnight. You just started breaking the right things, patterns. You stopped breaking down and started breaking cycles. You stopped replaying the past like it owed you clarity. You stopped shrinking every time someone made you feel small, and slowly, quietly, you became someone they could no longer manipulate through inconsistency. Because once you heal the part of you that needed them to love you correctly, you stop hoping for anything from them at all. Think about it like this. Your past self was like a house with paper walls. Every gust of their mood could tear through you. One bad moment from them, and your whole emotional structure collapsed. But now you're concrete, not numb, not heartless, just built differently, reinforced. Because you learned that being emotional doesn't mean being unstable, and being stoic doesn't mean being cold. It means you feel deeply, but don't crumble easily. You observe, you understand, but you don't react on command, and they're noticing that. They're noticing the difference between the person who once shattered in silence and the one who now walks in clarity. That's what's shaking them. Not just that you changed, but that you didn't ask for permission to do it. You didn't warn them. You didn't post about it. You just vanished from the version of yourself that tolerated being treated like an afterthought. Now, when they test the waters, when they poke at the old wounds, they don't find the same softness. They find discipline, boundaries, stillness. They feel the space where your chaos used to be, and it unnerves them. They miss the power they had over your emotions. But that power only existed when you didn't see your own. That was their window. That was the crack they slipped through. Your lack of clarity. But that crack? It's sealed now. And nothing gets through it without deserving to. This growth wasn't clean, though. It came with sleepless nights, with doubts, with flashbacks to conversations that ended with confusion instead of closure. You didn't just wake up unbothered. You chose to stop feeding the emotional storm. You chose to stop giving your peace away like a discount. You chose silence over explaining, peace over proving, stillness over survival mode obsession. And every time you chose differently, you broke the pattern, even when it hurt, even when it felt unnatural. Because growth, real growth, always feels lonely before it feels powerful. Let's be clear, the version of you that used to break down wasn't weak. He was just exhausted. He was just human. But he was also waiting for someone to give him closure, attention, love, validation. And that's why he kept breaking, because he was built on borrowed worth, on expectations that kept shifting, on trying to be enough for people who didn't even know how to hold their own emotions, let alone honor yours. But that version of you, he's not here anymore. Now, you don't chase conversations that lead to nowhere. You don't explain your worth to people who never saw it. You don't bend to be understood. You let the misunderstanding happen, because clarity doesn't need agreement, and your value isn't up for negotiation. They'll say you changed, that you're different now, that you're harder, colder, distant. But the truth is, you're just not available for dysfunction anymore. You're not on standby. You're not a fixable, bendable version of who you used to be. You're the storm they didn't see coming. Not destructive, but unstoppable. Because now you're powered by peace, not pain, by purpose, not persuasion. You don't fall apart to be noticed. You stay whole, even when no one's watching. This is where everything shifts. This is where you stop bleeding for people who only ever brought the blade. This is where you finally breathe without waiting for someone else to give you air. And yeah, they're realizing it now, realizing the same things that once made you break now bounce off you like nothing, realizing they no longer get to be the force that dictates your emotional weather. So write this in the comments right now. I don't break, I build. Show them, show yourself, show the world around you that this evolution isn't a shield. It's a new system, one that protects peace over proving, one that breaks patterns instead of people. Stay with me, because the next shift hits even deeper. Number 3, they could shake you. Now you're unmoved. They used to rattle your soul with a single word. Now, even their silence can't touch your stillness. There was a time when your whole mood lived in their hands. One glance, one ignored message, one shift in their tone, and suddenly your day was ruined. You walked on emotional eggshells, trying to decode every word, every pause, every distant look. You were constantly adjusting yourself just to keep the peace, just to hold on to a connection that never held you back the same way. You were shaking, not from weakness, but from trying too hard to be enough in a space that kept shifting under your feet. They knew it too. On some level, they felt it, that invisible power they had over you, not because they earned it, but because you hadn't realized you could reclaim it. Every reaction you gave them, every time your heart dropped because they pulled away, it fed that silent control. You didn't just care, you overcared, you overthought, you overgave, not out of desperation, but out of belief. Belief that if you just held on tighter, maybe they wouldn't let go. But the truth, my friends, is that no amount of holding on can make someone stay who only ever showed up to see if you still cared. They weren't shaking you out of love. They were shaking you to see if you'd break, and sometimes you did. Quietly, alone. You never showed the full fracture to the world, but inside, your peace was shattered on repeat, not by chaos, but by the subtle erosion of your boundaries. You gave them the map to your emotions, and they pressed every button just to feel important. Not anymore. Now they try the same tactics, the vague messages, the sudden reappearances, the emotional breadcrumbs that used to pull you back into that old loop. But you don't move, you don't reply, you don't chase, because when you finally build your emotional center from the inside, nothing outside has the power to shake it. That's the part they're struggling to understand. You haven't become heartless, you've just become anchored, rooted. You're not cold, you're just no longer affected by the storm that once knocked you down. Your silence is no longer a waiting room, it's a declaration, a message that says, I no longer dance to rhythms that disturb my peace. Imagine a tree in the middle of a hurricane, branches bending, leaves flying, chaos swirling. But the roots, deep, unmoved. That's you now. Life might still throw storms your way. People might still test your stillness. But your center holds. Not because nothing touches you, but because nothing owns you. And they feel that. They feel the distance between who you were and who you've become. They used to be able to trigger you without even trying. Now they're standing outside your energy like it's a locked door. This is the truth they never expected to face. You were never fragile. You were just unguarded. And now that you've placed your peace behind walls built from discipline, healing, and truth, they don't know how to reach you. They still try, they still test, but it's like trying to stir the ocean with a single finger. Your depth has outgrown their drama. They'll say you've changed, and they're right. You no longer make space for half efforts. You no longer respond to confusion. You no longer hand over your calm just because someone else refuses to create their own. That's not indifference. That's evolution. That's what happens when you stop reacting and start reflecting. When you stop responding to noise and start protecting your energy like it's sacred. Because it is. Let's break the lie while we're here. Being unshaken means you don't care. False. Being unshaken means you care deeply, just not recklessly. You've stopped letting everyone with a mood or a memory walk through your emotional doors without an invitation. You've learned to sit in silence without needing to fill it. You've learned to feel disappointment without chasing clarity. You've learned that peace isn't something they can give you. It's something you choose, daily, in spite of them. And yeah, my friends, it's difficult, because part of you still remembers how to shake. The old you still whispers sometimes, telling you to check in, to reach out, to crack the silence just to feel something familiar. But you don't. You breathe, you sit with it. You remind yourself that stillness is strength, that your energy is not public property, that being unmoved is not being uncaring, it's being in control. So now when they try the old tricks, they're met with something they can't manipulate: stillness. Your silence doesn't mean you're waiting. Your lack of reaction doesn't mean you didn't notice. You notice everything. You just stopped allowing everything to access you. That's what's shaking them now. Not your presence, but your absence. Not your noise, but your composure. They don't know what to do with a version of you that doesn't shatter when they stop showing up. They don't recognize this grounded, focused, silent force that used to crumble at the sound of their name. So write this in the comments right now. I don't shake, I stand. Say it for the version of you who used to fold. Say it for the you who no longer lives in fear of their silence. Say it for the you that now holds peace like armor. Stay with me, because what's coming next will hit even harder. Number 4. They expected you to chase. You chose distance. They only miss you now because you stopped showing up where you were never met. At one point, my friends, your love looked like pursuit, like texting first, checking in, explaining yourself after every silence, forgiving too soon, holding on too tight. You chased, not because you lacked pride, but because you genuinely cared. You wanted it to work, you wanted to be seen, and so you kept showing up, even when the door only opened halfway, even when the energy felt one-sided, even when you knew deep down that you were investing in a connection that never returned the same fire. They got used to that. They got used to you being the one who tried, the one who reached out after an argument, the one who cracked the silence first, the one who stayed emotionally available even when they weren't. That version of you, chasing, bending, apologizing for being too much, that version was never about weakness. It was about hope. You thought maybe if you just loved a little harder, showed a little more patience, they'd finally meet you where you stood. But what they didn't know is that even the most patient soul gets tired of being the only one walking toward the flame. And now it's different. Now you don't chase. You don't reach out. You don't run toward confusion dressed as chemistry. You don't follow where you're not invited. You've replaced pursuit with presence. Instead of chasing their attention, you're building your peace. Instead of running toward closure, you're sitting in clarity. And that's what's hitting them now. Not that you disappeared, but that you're not waiting anymore. You're not orbiting their mood swings. You're not hoping they'll finally pick you. That silence they used to weaponize, it doesn't work anymore, because you've learned that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is choose distance, not out of anger, not out of pride, but out of self-respect. It's funny how they thought your effort would last forever, that they could come and go and you'd keep the door unlocked. that you'd always be available emotionally, even if they weren't consistent. But folks, there comes a moment where the soul says, enough. And it's never loud. It's not dramatic. It's quiet, calm, final. You just stop participating in your own mistreatment. You stop showing up to be misunderstood. And suddenly, you're not chasing them anymore. You're chasing peace, purpose, legacy, stillness. And they don't know what to do with that version of you. The version that no longer checks their status. The version that no longer over-explains. The version that sees their inconsistency and chooses not to engage. This new you doesn't run after people who walk away. You don't beg for attention. You don't fight to stay in places that drain you. You choose space, not because you're bitter, but because you're finally clear on what love isn't. Love isn't guessing. It isn't games. It isn't proving your worth to someone who never saw it in the first place. And I get it. It's not easy. There's a fear in distance, that voice in your head asking, what if they forget me? What if they replace me? What if this is the end for good? But that fear isn't truth. It's the last echo of the old you, the version that believed your value depended on someone else remembering it. But you've grown past that. You don't live in what if anymore. You live in what is, and what is peace. What is power. What is the freedom of not being emotionally enslaved to someone else's inconsistency. You've stopped running toward people who only walk when it's convenient. They expected you to chase, to double text, to fall apart when they pull away. But instead you chose silence, you chose stillness, and that distance, that's the message, not the petty kind, the powerful kind, the kind that says, I've outgrown needing your presence to feel whole, because chasing someone who isn't emotionally available doesn't prove love. It erases self-love. Let's break the lie while we're here. If you don't fight for it, you didn't care. No, real caring doesn't mean chasing. It means holding space for truth, even when it hurts. And the truth is, you can't make someone see your value by overextending. You can't force connection by being the only one reaching. That's not love. That's survival mode. And you've walked out of that chapter. Now they're sitting with the same silence they thought would bring you crawling back. But it doesn't. Not anymore. You've learned that peace is too expensive to trade for temporary attention. You don't respond to breadcrumbs. You don't entertain confusion. You don't move just because someone remembers your name when they're bored. So write this in the comments right now. I choose distance over disrespect. Show them, show yourself, show the world that you no longer run toward chaos. You don't chase, you choose. Stay with me, because the next shift is the one that will remind you why your energy has become so rare. Number 5, you don't need validation, you became it. They don't know how to handle you now, because your worth no longer depends on their attention. There was a time, my friends, when their validation felt like oxygen, when one compliment from them could lift your spirit, and one cold look could crush your confidence. You weren't chasing love, you were chasing proof. Proof that you were enough, that you were seen, that you were worthy. You didn't realize it then, but every time you waited for their reply, every time you tried to win their approval, you were handing them the remote control to your self-worth, and they held it carelessly. They gave you just enough, a few sweet words, a little attention, a flicker of warmth when they sensed you pulling away, just enough to keep you in orbit. They didn't have to give you everything because they knew you'd cling to anything. They knew their silence made you question your value. That's how emotional control works. It's not about yelling, it's about withholding. It's about turning love into a reward you're forced to earn, and you, being all heart, kept reaching for it. But here's the shift they never saw coming. You stopped reaching. You stopped asking for crumbs when you realized you could bake your own bread. You stopped seeking permission to feel confident. You stopped needing someone else to echo back your worth before you believed in it. Because eventually the pain taught you what praise never could, that your value is not a mirror, it's a fire. Now, you walk different, you speak different, you move like someone who's not trying to be chosen anymore. You know you're chosen by yourself, by your higher path, by your purpose. That glow they're noticing, that's not a new outfit, that's self-ownership. That's what it looks like when someone stops performing and starts living. And folks, this kind of confidence makes people nervous, especially those who only knew you when you doubted yourself. The people who used to keep you small don't know what to do with the version of you that no longer asks for their opinion. You don't post to be noticed. You don't speak to impress. You don't bend to fit into rooms where you no longer belong. You've become the thing they thought you'd always search for: validation itself. Let's break a lie while we're here. They told you love means sacrificing yourself, that to be good, to be wanted, you had to be soft, accommodating, silent. But the truth? Real love doesn't require shrinking. It doesn't demand your silence to maintain peace. It doesn't use your wounds as leverage. And validation, real validation, doesn't come from others. It comes from walking in alignment, even when no one is clapping. Especially when no one is clapping. You used to second-guess your value every time they pulled back. Now you don't flinch. Now their silence doesn't trigger your spiral, because silence used to feel like rejection. But now, silence feels like protection. You don't beg to be chosen. You've realized that your presence is a gift, and not everyone has the hands to hold it. And here's the beautiful part. They're starting to feel it. They're feeling the gap between who you were and who you've become. The person who once lit up every time they paid attention is gone. Now, even if they return with the attention you used to crave, it's too late. Not because you hate them, but because you've elevated to a level where their validation simply doesn't carry weight anymore. They used to be the sun, and you revolved around them. Now you've built your own light, your own orbit, your own warmth, and those who once fed off your insecurity are starving because they don't recognize this version of you. The one who speaks with certainty, the one who doesn't chase, the one who validates themselves internally before looking to the outside world. But let's be honest, it wasn't always this way. You earned this clarity. You had to dig deep. You had to unravel all the beliefs you inherited from broken places. You had to sit with yourself in silence and ask, why do I need them to say I'm enough to believe it? And in that space, you learned something powerful. The absence of their approval is not the absence of your worth. It never was. Now you're not seeking to be liked. You're seeking to be true. You're not aiming to impress. You're aiming to impact. You're not building a highlight reel. You're building a legacy. That's what happens when a person stops outsourcing their confidence and starts living in their truth. They become unshakable, unbothered, unmistakable. So write this in the comments right now. I am the validation. Say it for every version of you that waited for a message that never came. Say it for the you that questioned your worth in someone else's silence. Say it so loud that your past doesn't echo anymore. Stay with me, because next we dive into the part they truly didn't see coming, the strength you built from the scars they left behind. Number 6. They remember the hurt you showed, not the strength you built. They only remember the tears. They don't see the tower you built from them. They remember you breaking. They remember the anger in your voice, the sadness in your texts, the way your energy cracked every time they disappeared, disappointed you, or gave you less than you deserved. They remember the hurt version of you, because that's when they felt in control. That's when they knew their silence had weight. That's when they knew they could press a button and watch you unravel. But what they don't see, what they can't see, is what happened after the breakdown. They don't see the nights you sat in silence, wrestling your thoughts like shadows. They don't see how many times you typed a message, then deleted it, choosing dignity over desperation. They don't see the moments you cried, then stood up anyway. They don't see how you learned to hold yourself when no one else would. They don't know how you rebuilt your identity, not from comfort, but from chaos. Because, folks, pain doesn't just destroy, it builds. And you used every piece of that heartbreak to build a version of yourself they never saw coming. They were busy watching you fall apart. You were quietly learning how to put yourself back together without their help. They watched you bleed, but they never expected you to armor up. They thought your softness would last forever. But pain has a funny way of flipping the script. One day you cry, the next day you build, one day you're begging, the next you're becoming. Now, they're remembering the cracks, but they can't comprehend the foundation. They remember when you were vulnerable, but they don't recognize the version of you who learned to protect that vulnerability with boundaries, with silence, with distance. You didn't just survive the pain, you used it. And that's the difference between the old you and the new one. Imagine this. You were once a glass vase, transparent, delicate, easy to tip over, easy to break, and they broke you, accidentally, recklessly, maybe even intentionally. But instead of shattering into pieces and staying that way, you melted those shards down. You turned heat into form. You became steel. Now they reach for that same fragile version of you, and they're met with someone they can't bend anymore. And here's the thing. They don't want to remember your strength, because if they admit you've grown, they have to admit they lost access to someone irreplaceable. It's easier for them to label you as bitter, distant, not the same, because that keeps them in control of the narrative. It lets them pretend you're just reacting, not evolving, but you're not reacting anymore. You've gone beyond reaction. You're responding to life now, not to them. They remember the hurt because that's when they were the center of your world. That's when you made them feel important, needed, powerful. But they don't get that version anymore. That version is gone. The hurt didn't make you harder. It made you deeper, wiser, focused. Your love didn't disappear. It just got smarter about where it goes. And now you're a mystery, not because you've changed completely, but because you stopped putting your heart on display for people who only came to watch it break. Let's break a lie real quick. If they hurt you deeply, they must have mattered deeply. No, sometimes people hurt you deeply because you gave them access they didn't earn. And now that access is closed, not out of spite, but out of wisdom, you finally realize that just because someone was part of your story doesn't mean they get to edit your future. They'll remember how you cried, but they won't mention how you healed. They'll remember how you begged, but not how you rebuilt. They'll remember when they mattered, but they'll never accept that they don't anymore. And that's okay, because this part of the journey isn't about them understanding, it's about you remembering. Remembering that your scars are proof of survival, that your silence is power, that your distance is discipline, that the strength they ignored is now the very thing they can't reach. You've become the version of yourself you always needed, but had to break to find. That's the real evolution. That's the Stoic blessing. So let them remember the hurt. You'll remember the healing. Write this in the comments right now. I turned pain into power. Say it loud. Say it for the you who stayed silent when you were screaming inside. Say it for the you who got up every time you were knocked down. Say it for the future version of you who will never again hand their peace to someone unworthy of it. And if this entire journey, from pain to peace, from reaction to rebirth, spoke to something real inside you, this is your moment. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, share it with someone who's on that path too. And remember, your silence is sacred. Your strength is silent. Your growth is unrecognizable. And that's exactly how it should be. They remember the hurt, but now they'll feel the distance. This is your evolution. Own it.